Ethan Miller shot up in bed, his piercing scream slicing through the pre-dawn silence. The 7-year-old's small body trembled as he clawed frantically at his arms, his skin on fire with unbearable itching. His mother, Sarah, burst through the door seconds later, fumbling for the light switch. When the harsh fluorescent bulb flickered to life, she froze in the doorway, one hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered, rushing to her son's side. Ethan's arms were covered in angry red welts, some clustered in lines, others appearing as solitary raised bumps. Fresh tears streamed down his flushed cheeks as he showed her the new marks on his neck and stomach. "They're biting me again, Mommy," he sobbed. "The monster's under my bed." Sarah pulled back his dinosaur-patterned sheets, expecting to find the culprits. Instead, she found only clean fabric and her son's growing terror reflected in his wide, bloodshot eyes. Whatever was attacking her little boy had once again vanished without a trace. Sarah Miller hadn't always been the woman who counted pennies at the grocery store checkout. Before her husband Michael's death 3 years ago, she'd been a woman with plans finishing nursing school, buying a small house with a yard for Ethan, maybe even a family vacation to Disney World someday. Now, at 34, she was a widow with perpetual dark circles under her eyes, working double shifts as a nurse's aide at Springfield General Hospital. Michael had been a wildlife photographer for National Geographic, his passion for capturing the world's overlooked wonders taking him to remote corners of the globe. His final assignment in Brazil's Amazon basin had yielded some of his most stunning work, and his last gift to their son, a handcrafted teddy bear with mismatched button eyes that 4-year-old Ethan had promptly named Mr. Buttons. 3 weeks after returning home, Michael had fallen asleep at the wheel driving home late from a meeting with his editor. The doctors said he died instantly. The insurance money had lasted barely a year before medical bills and the recession claimed it. Sarah and Ethan had downsized to a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a part of town where police sirens were a nightly lullaby. For 3 years, Sarah had slept on a pull-out couch while Ethan took the bedroom, a temporary solution that had stretched far beyond temporary. Until last month. Sarah's newly earned nursing certification had brought a modest raise, enough to afford a small 2-bedroom apartment in Cedar Heights. The building was older, the appliances outdated, but it had decent schools and was closer to the hospital. Most importantly, Ethan would have his own room, and Sarah could sleep in an actual bed. At 7, Ethan was a quiet boy with his father's sandy brown hair and thoughtful eyes. He carried Mr. Buttons everywhere to school, to doctor appointments, to bed each night. The well-worn teddy with its missing eye and patched paw was more than a stuffed animal. It was Ethan's talisman against a world that had already taken too much from him. "It's going to be different here," Sarah had promised as they carried boxes up to apartment 3B, trying to believe it herself. "This is our fresh start." She hadn't known then how cruelly prophetic those words would prove to be, or that their fresh start would soon become a waking nightmare. Sarah Miller shot up from bed at the sound of her son's piercing scream. The digital clock on her nightstand glowed 3:17 a.m. as she stumbled through the unfamiliar darkness of their new apartment, heart pounding against her ribs. When she flipped on Ethan's bedroom light, the 7-year-old was frantically scratching at his arms, tears streaming down his flushed cheeks. "They're biting me, Mommy," he sobbed, showing her his forearms covered in angry red welts, some clustered in lines, others appearing as solitary raised bumps. Sarah pulled back his dinosaur-patterned sheets, expecting to find the cause of his distress, but discovered only clean fabric and her son's growing terror reflected in his wide, bloodshot eyes. "Let me see, baby," she said, gently examining the bites that peppered his small body. Her nursing training kicked in as she noted their appearance small, raised, with a distinct red halo around each one. Mosquitoes, perhaps? But in late October, with the window screens firmly in place, she applied hydrocortisone cream to ease the itching and gave him children's Benadryl from their still unpacked medicine kit. Try to sleep, sweetie. We'll figure this out in the morning. Sarah stayed beside him until the medication took effect, his breathing finally evening out in sleep. She returned to her own room but lay awake until dawn, mentally cataloging possible culprits: allergic reaction to new bedding, mosquitoes somehow getting in, or the thought she dreaded most, bedbugs. By morning, the welts had subsided slightly, and in the rush to get Ethan to school on time and herself to work for a AM shift, Sarah filed the incident away as a one-time occurrence. Perhaps Ethan had simply developed a sensitivity to the laundry detergent she'd used on his new sheets. 3 nights later, it happened again. This time, the bites had spread to his neck and back. Sarah stripped his bed completely, washing everything in the hottest water setting and spraying the mattress with rubbing alcohol. She checked every seam, every corner of his room for signs of bedbugs, but found nothing: no discarded shell casings, no tiny black excrement, no live insects. "I don't understand," she confided to her coworker Lisa during their break a week later. "The bites keep appearing, but there's nothing in his room. I've looked everywhere." By then, Sarah had spent nearly $200 they couldn't afford on pest sprays, mattress covers, and essential oils that promised to repel insects. "Maybe it's not bugs," Lisa suggested, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Could be an allergic reaction to something in the apartment, or stress from the move." But Sarah knew better. The pattern of the bites, some in clusters, others in straight lines, was consistent with feeding insects. And they only appeared at night, only on Ethan. Her own skin remained completely unmarked. By the 3rd week, Ethan had developed dark circles under his eyes from constantly interrupted sleep. His teacher, Mrs. Patterson, called Sarah to express concern over his repeated dozing off during class. "He's not himself, Mrs. Miller. He's withdrawn during recess, and I noticed him scratching quite a bit." That weekend, Sarah spent her entire paycheck on a professional exterminator, a burly man named Frank, who spent 4 hours inspecting their apartment. Like her, he found no evidence of bed bugs or any other pests. "I don't know what to tell you, ma'am," he said, packing up his equipment. "In 20 years, I've never seen bites like these without finding the bugs that caused them." On Monday morning, Sarah was called to Ethan's school. She found him in the nurse's office, his face tear-stained, his arms wrapped protectively around Mr. Buttons. The school nurse, Mrs. Hernandez, had separated them from the other children with a privacy screen. "Sarah," Mrs. Hernandez said quietly, "I've been a school nurse for 20 years. These don't look like typical insect bites to me. They're too numerous, too patterned. And Ethan tells me they only happen at night." Sarah nodded, fighting back tears of frustration and exhaustion. "I think you need to take him to a doctor," the nurse continued, handing her a referral slip. "Today, if possible. I've written down the contact information for Dr. Peterson. He sometimes takes emergency cases and works with a low-income clinic." "I can't miss any more work," Sarah whispered. "I'm already on thin ice with my supervisor," but one look at Ethan, curled up on the vinyl cot with his teddy bear clutched tight, made her decision for her. Some things couldn't wait, even if it meant risking her job. Dr. Peterson's clinic waiting room was crowded with patients sitting on worn plastic chairs. The receptionist barely looked up as she pushed a clipboard across the counter. "Fill these out. It'll be at least 2 hours." After waiting 3 hours with an increasingly miserable Ethan, They were finally ushered into a small examination room. Dr. Peterson entered without knocking a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetual frown. He glanced at the chart without making eye contact. "So, we have insect bites? Let's take a look." As Ethan removed his shirt, Dr. Peterson's frown deepened. He prodded one of the inflamed areas with a gloved finger, causing Ethan to wince. "How often do you wash his bedding, Mrs. Miller?" "It's Miss," Sarah corrected, feeling a defensive edge creeping into her voice. "And I've been washing everything every day since this started. I've tried every home remedy, checked every inch of his room. I'm a nurse's aide at Springfield General. I know about hygiene protocols." The doctor made a non-committal sound, scrolling through Ethan's chart on his tablet. "You recently moved, it says here. 3 weeks ago?" "Yes, but the apartment was empty for a while before we moved in. I cleaned everything thoroughly." Dr. Peterson's eyes flicked to the teddy bear clutched in Ethan's arms. "And what about that? Has it been cleaned?" Sarah hesitated. "He's had Mr. Buttons since he was 4. I spot clean it, but it's special to him. It was the last gift from his father before he died." Something in Dr. Peterson's expression hardened. "Miss Miller, bedbugs can hide in stuffed animals. If you're not addressing all potential habitats, you're just going to keep dealing with this problem." "But I've looked everywhere for bugs. There aren't any in our apartment." "Just because you can't see them doesn't mean they aren't there." Dr. Peterson sighed heavily. "Look, I'm going to prescribe an antibiotic cream for the infected bites and some antihistamines for the itching, but the real treatment is getting rid of the infestation. That may mean making some difficult decisions about possessions." His eyes went meaningfully to Mr. Buttons again, and Sarah felt Ethan's grip on the bear tighten. "There are resources available," he continued, his tone shifting to something that set alarm bells ringing in Sarah's mind. "Services that can help families who might be struggling with adequate housing conditions." Sarah stiffened. "Our housing is perfectly adequate, Dr. Peterson. We're just dealing with an insect problem." He made another note in the chart. "I'm required by law to report suspected cases of child endangerment, Miss Miller. Allowing a severe infestation to continue without proper intervention could be considered neglectful." The blood drained from Sarah's face. "Are you threatening to call Child Protective Services on me because my son has bug bites?" "I'm informing you of my professional obligations," he replied coolly. "This level of infestation suggests an unsafe living environment. I strongly recommend you take immediate action to resolve it." During the drive home, Sarah gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The prescription for antibiotic cream had cost her grocery money for the week, and Dr. Peterson's thinly veiled threat hung over her like a storm cloud. How could she resolve an infestation she couldn't even find? 3 days later, a woman in a neat gray suit knocked on their apartment door. She introduced herself as Kimberly Taylor from Child Protective Services, her voice professionally neutral as she explained she was conducting a wellness check based on Dr. Peterson's report. By the 6th week after the mysterious bites first appeared, Ethan Miller was a shadow of his former self. His once spotless attendance record had been shattered, dark circles forming permanent half-moons under his eyes. He'd lost weight, his school clothes hanging loose on his small frame. The antibiotic cream Dr. Peterson prescribed controlled the infections, but did nothing to prevent new bites from appearing, and the antihistamines made him so drowsy he could barely function at school when he did attend. The Child Protective Services visit had sent ripples through their small apartment building. Mrs. Cooper, the property manager, now eyed Sarah suspiciously in the hallway. Their next-door neighbor, elderly Mrs. Wilson, hurried inside her apartment whenever she saw them. Worst of all, the children at Ethan's school had somehow learned about the bug boy in second grade, and the playground had become a daily exercise in humiliation. "I don't want to go to school anymore," Ethan whispered one morning, his voice small and defeated as Sarah tried to coax him from beneath his covers. "Jason Perkins told everyone I have bugs living in my skin." Sarah sat on the edge of his bed, her heart breaking. "Those kids are wrong, buddy. You're not dirty or different. You're just dealing with something the doctors haven't figured out yet." "But what if the bugs are inside me?" His bottom lip trembled. "What if I'm making them?" That evening, after finally getting Ethan to sleep in her bed, his room now abandoned as a failed experiment, Sarah sat at their small kitchen table with her laptop open to a medical forum. She'd spent hundreds of dollars on 2 different exterminators, replaced Ethan's mattress with a floor model that cost a week's grocery money, and tried every home remedy suggested by well-meaning coworkers. Nothing helped. The mysterious bites continued to appear nightly, always in the same patterns, small clusters or straight lines, primarily on his arms, neck, and back. Yet no one, not even professionals with specialized equipment, could find the source. Sarah had checked Ethan's skin with a magnifying glass, wondering if it could be scabies or some microscopic parasite, but found nothing. The only consistent factor was that the bites appeared while he slept. Miss Taylor from CPS had scheduled another home visit for the following week. Sarah's supervisor at the hospital had called her in for a discussion about reliability after her 3rd late arrival that month. The walls were closing in from all sides, and Sarah was running out of options. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that Sarah stumbled upon a blog post about unusual insect infestations. The author, Dr. Rebecca Cheng, was described as an entomologist with the University Natural History Museum who specialized in parasitic insects. The post discussed cases of mysterious bites that conventional pest control couldn't resolve. Something in the detailed, thoughtful writing gave Sarah her first flicker of hope in weeks. The museum was across town, and Sarah had no idea if this Dr. Chang would even speak to her without an appointment, but she was running out of options. The next day was Saturday, and the museum would be open to the public. It was worth a try. "Are we here to see the dinosaurs?" Ethan asked as they approached the large brick building with banners advertising a new exhibit. A hint of his old excitement broke through the fatigue that had become his constant state. "Maybe after," Sarah said, squeezing his hand. "First, Mommy needs to talk to a bug scientist who works here. She might be able to help us with your bites." The information desk directed them to a small office in the research wing, away from the public exhibits. Sarah had expected to find a closed door or a secretary blocking access, but instead discovered a middle-aged Asian woman in a lab coat examining something under a microscope, her office door wide open. "Excuse me," Sarah said hesitantly. "Are you Dr. Chang? I read your article online about unusual insect bites." The woman looked up, pushing her glasses to the top of her head. Her eyes moved from Sarah to Ethan, lingering on the visible marks on his neck. "I am," she confirmed, standing. "And you're not here for the dinosaur exhibit, are you?" Sarah shook her head. "My son has been suffering from unexplained bites for almost 2 months now. No one can find what's causing them." Dr. Chang gestured to the chairs opposite her desk. "Please, sit down. Tell me everything from the beginning." For the next 20 minutes, Sarah recounted their ordeal while Ethan quietly played with Mr. Buttons in the corner of the office, occasionally scratching at his arms despite the medication. Dr. Chang listened without interruption, making occasional notes. And these bites, she finally said, they appear only at night, always in the same patterns. Yes, usually in lines or clusters, mostly on his arms, neck, and back. May I examine them? Dr. Chang asked, directing the question partly to Sarah and partly to Ethan himself. Ethan looked up at the scientist, then at his mother, who nodded encouragingly. He approached cautiously, still clutching his teddy bear. "That's a very nice bear," Dr. Chang commented as she gently examined the bites on Ethan's arms. "Does he have a name?" "Mr. Buttons," Ethan replied quietly. "My dad gave him to me before he went to heaven." Something flickered across Dr. Chang's face, a moment of recognition, quickly masked. "He looks like a good friend. Does Mr. Buttons sleep in your bed with you?" Ethan nodded. "Every night. He protects me from monsters." Dr. Chang's examination was thorough but gentle. She used a small magnifying glass to look closely at the bite patterns, asking Ethan if certain areas hurt or itched more than others. She took several photographs with a small digital camera, explaining each step to make sure Ethan wasn't frightened. "Miss Miller," she said finally, "would you allow me to take a few samples? Nothing invasive, just some tape pressed against the bite sites to collect any microscopic evidence, and perhaps a small fabric sample from Ethan's pajamas and bedding." Of course, Sarah agreed immediately. "Anything that might help. We can go home and bring back whatever you need." Dr. Chang shook her head. "Actually, I was hoping I could come to your apartment. Seeing the environment could provide important context." "Please," Sarah said, hope making her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "We'd welcome you. When can you come?" "I finish here at 5 today. Would early evening work for you?" As they exchanged contact information, Sarah noticed Dr. Chang's gaze returning repeatedly to Mr. Buttons, a thoughtful expression on her face. At exactly 5:30 that evening, Dr. Chang arrived at their apartment building carrying a leather satchel of equipment. She greeted Mrs. Wilson in the hallway with a polite nod, but the elderly neighbor merely pursed her lips and hurried inside her own apartment. "Don't mind her," Sarah said as she opened the door. "The whole building thinks we're carrying the plague." "People fear what they don't understand," Dr. Chang said sympathetically. "It's a very human reaction." The scientist's inspection of their apartment was unlike any of the previous ones. Where the exterminators had focused on common hiding spots for known pests, Dr. Chang approached the space like a detective, her eyes taking in details others had overlooked. She examined the window screens with a magnifying glass, checked the air vents, and spent considerable time in the bathroom inspecting the drains. "You've kept this place immaculate," she commented. "Most people dealing with mysterious bites let panic take over. You've been very methodical." "My nursing training," Sarah explained, watching as the scientist opened her bag of equipment. "We're taught to approach problems systematically." Dr. Chang nodded approvingly, setting out small collection vials and slides. "That same approach will help us now. Could you show me exactly where Ethan sleeps and what his routine is before bed?" They moved into Sarah's bedroom, where Ethan had been sleeping since his own room became too frightening for him. He sat on the edge of the bed, Mr. Buttons in his lap, as Sarah explained their nightly ritual bath, teeth brushing, story time, then lights out. "And Mr. Buttons is always with you?" Dr. Chang asked Ethan directly. He nodded solemnly. "He gets lonely if I leave him alone." "Of course," Dr. Chang agreed. "May I see him for a moment?" Ethan hesitated, then reluctantly handed over his treasured teddy bear. Dr. Chang handled it with great care, examining the worn fabric, the patched areas, the missing button eye that had given the bear his name. "He's very special," she said, returning Mr. Buttons to Ethan. "Thank you for letting me meet him." She then took several sample skin swabs from Ethan's recent bite marks, dust from between the mattress and box spring, fibers from the bed sheets. Throughout the process, she maintained a conversation with Ethan about his interests and favorite subjects at school, putting him at ease in a way no other investigator had managed. When she finally packed up her equipment, Sarah walked her to the door, careful to speak quietly so Ethan, who was drawing at the kitchen table, wouldn't overhear. "Do you have any idea what might be causing this?" she asked, unable to keep the desperate hope from her voice. Dr. Chang's expression was thoughtful. "I have a theory, but I need to examine these samples in my lab before I can be certain. What I can tell you is that these are definitely insect bites, not a skin condition or allergic reaction. The pattern and inflammation are too specific." "That's what I've been saying all along," Sarah said, exhaling heavily. "But if they are insect bites, why can't anyone find the insects?" "Some parasites are remarkably good at hiding," Dr. Chang replied. "They've evolved over millions of years to avoid detection, but they always leave evidence behind, even if it's microscopic. I should have some answers for you within 48 hours. "Thank you," Sarah said, meaning it more deeply than she could express. "You're the first person who's really listened to us." The next day brought an unexpected change. For the first time since the bites had started, Ethan woke without any new marks. Sarah checked every inch of his skin, unable to believe their luck. "Maybe Dr. Chang scared them away," Ethan suggested, managing a small smile. "She's like a superhero for bugs." "Maybe," Sarah agreed, not wanting to get her hopes up too high. One night without bites didn't mean their ordeal was over, but it was enough to lift their spirits as they prepared for the day. Sarah even managed to get Ethan to school on time, arriving at work without the cloud of exhaustion and worry that had become her constant companion. Her cautious optimism lasted until just after lunch, when she received a call from Dr. Chang. The scientist's voice was urgent, with none of the measured calm of their previous interactions. "Miss Miller, I need to see you and Ethan as soon as possible. My lab tests have revealed something concerning." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What is it? What did you find?" "I'd rather discuss it in person. How quickly can you get to the museum?" "I'm at work until 4, and then I have to pick up Ethan from after-school care. We could be there by 5. "That will work. Come directly to my office." Dr. Chang hesitated, then added, "And Miss Miller, please bring Mr. Buttons with you." Dr. Chang was waiting for them in her office, her normally tidy desk now covered with papers, microscope slides, and several sealed plastic containers. When Sarah and Ethan entered, the scientist immediately rose, her expression grave yet determined. She gestured to the chairs she had arranged for them, then closed the door for privacy. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said, her voice measured. "Before I explain what I've found, I want to assure you that there is a solution to Ethan's problem. It will require difficult decisions, but we can resolve this." Sarah felt Ethan press against her side, clutching Mr. Buttons tightly to his chest. She placed a protective arm around his shoulders. "Just tell us what's happening," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We've been in the dark for too long." Dr. Chang nodded, pulling her chair closer to them. "Miss Miller, the samples I collected revealed the presence of a parasitic insect called Triatoma infestans. It's commonly known as the kissing bug because it often bites humans near the mouth or face, though it can bite anywhere on the body." She reached for one of the sealed containers on her desk, holding it up so they could see through the clear plastic. Inside was what looked like a tiny brown insect, barely visible to the naked eye. This is the culprit. They're extremely small, especially in their juvenile stage, smaller than most bedbugs and nocturnal, which is why no one has been able to spot them. They feed on blood and typically bite in patterns exactly like the marks on Ethan's skin. Sarah leaned forward, squinting at the container. How could the exterminators have missed them completely? They spent hours searching. Because, Dr. Chang said carefully, setting the container down, they weren't looking in the right place. Her eyes moved deliberately to Mr. Buttons in Ethan's arms. Sarah's breath caught as the implication became clear. You're saying they're in his teddy bear? Dr. Chang nodded solemnly. The fabric sample I took from Mr. Buttons showed high concentrations of these parasites. They've established a colony inside the stuffing, emerging at night to feed, then returning to their hiding place. The bear's thick fabric and dense stuffing provide the dark, warm environment they prefer. Ethan looked down at his beloved teddy bear with wide, disbelieving eyes. Mr. Buttons is hurting me? No, sweetheart, Sarah said quickly, pulling him closer. It's not Mr. Buttons' fault. It's the tiny bugs that moved into his stuffing without anyone knowing. Dr. Chang leaned forward, speaking directly to Ethan. Your mom is exactly right. Mr. Buttons would never want to hurt you. These bugs are just using him as a place to hide. They're the ones biting you, not your bear. Ethan's lower lip quivered. Can you make them go away? Can you fix Mr. Buttons? The scientist and Sarah exchanged a glance, the unspoken truth hanging heavily between them. Dr. Chang chose her words with obvious care. Ethan, these particular bugs are very hard to get rid of once they've settled in. They lay eggs deep inside fabric, and even special cleaning might not reach all of them. We might be able to treat Mr. Buttons, but there's a chance some bugs could survive and keep hurting you. Sarah watched as understanding dawned in her son's eyes, his small face crumpling with the cruel choice before him. She felt as though her heart were being torn in two. Are you saying we have to throw away Mr. Buttons? Ethan whispered, tears now flowing freely. Dr. Chang sighed. That would be the most certain way to eliminate the infestation. But before you decide, there's something else you should know. She hesitated, glancing at Sarah. This type of insect isn't common in this part of the country. They're typically found in Central and South America and rarely travel this far north. I was puzzled about how they could have reached your teddy bear. Sarah frowned. We bought our furniture secondhand when we moved. Could they have come from that? Possibly, but unlikely. These particular insects prefer fabric and stuffing to wood or metal. I believe they came with Mr. Buttons himself. Dr. Chang's expression turned contemplative. Miss Miller, you mentioned your husband passed away when Ethan was 4. May I ask if he traveled for work, particularly to South America? Sarah stared at her, confusion giving way to dawning realization. Yes, Michael was a wildlife photographer. His last assignment before the accident was in Brazil. He brought Mr. Buttons back for Ethan from that trip. It's entirely possible the insects were already in the bear when he purchased it, Dr. Chang explained gently. The species I identified can sometimes remain dormant for extended periods if conditions aren't ideal for feeding or reproduction. Something must have triggered their activity recently, perhaps the move to your new apartment, a change in temperature or humidity. Sarah ran a shaking hand through her hair, the implications overwhelming her. Michael's last gift to their son had become a source of torment. Yet it was also his most treasured possession, his connection to a father he barely remembered. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Dr. Chang glanced at Ethan, who sat silently weeping, then back to Sarah. "I can see how important Mr. Buttons is to both of you. I'd like to try treating the bear first. It would involve a specialized heat treatment followed by chemical treatment, then sealing him in a protective casing that would prevent any surviving insects from escaping." "Would that hurt Mr. Buttons?" Ethan asked, his voice small. "He might look a little different afterward," Dr. Chang admitted. "The heat could affect his stuffing, and he'd need to stay in the protective case. But you could still see him and keep him close, just not in bed with you at night." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude for this woman who understood that they weren't just dealing with a stuffed toy, but a precious link to someone they'd lost. "There's something else," Dr. Chang continued, her tone shifting slightly. "The apartment itself needs to be thoroughly treated. Even though the primary colony is in the bear, some insects may have migrated to other areas you're bedding, furniture, possibly the walls near where Ethan sleeps. I'd recommend a professional treatment of the entire space." Sarah's momentary relief crumbled. "I can't afford another exterminator. The last two nearly wiped out our savings, and they didn't even find the problem." "I have contacts at the university's entomology department who might be able to help," Dr. Chang offered. "They sometimes provide services at reduced costs for research purposes. This case would certainly be of scientific interest to them." While they discussed logistics, Ethan sat quietly, still cradling Mr. Buttons. When there was a pause in the conversation, he looked up at Dr. Chang with red-rimmed eyes. "Dr. Chang, why didn't the bugs bite me before? I've always slept with Mr. Buttons." It was an astute question, one that had been nagging at Sarah as well. The scientist nodded, acknowledging the insight. "That's an excellent question, Ethan. These insects are sensitive to environmental conditions. In your old apartment, something perhaps the temperature, humidity, or even the presence of other household chemicals may have kept them dormant. When you moved, those conditions changed, allowing them to become active." She turned to Sarah. "When exactly did the bite start? How long after you moved?" "About 3 days," Sarah recalled. "We moved on a weekend, and by Wednesday, I noticed the first bites on his ankle." Dr. Chang made a note. "That timing supports my theory. The change in environment activated the colony." With visible reluctance, Ethan handed his precious bear to the scientist. "Please be careful with him," he whispered. "He gets scared without me." Dr. Chang accepted the teddy bear with solemn reverence. "I promise to take excellent care of him, Ethan. Mr. Buttons is in good hands." The university team arrived the next morning, transforming Sarah and Ethan's apartment into what looked like a hazardous waste site, with plastic sheeting over furniture and specialized equipment humming in every room. The lead technician, a doctoral student named Marcus, had been apologetic about the disruption, but insistent on thoroughness. "These Triatoma infestans are resilient creatures," he explained, showing Sarah microscopic images of the insects they'd already collected. "They can hide in cracks smaller than a credit card's edge, and their eggs are nearly invisible to the naked eye." Sarah and Ethan spent the day at Lisa's apartment, Ethan subdued and listless, picking at the sandwich Lisa had made him. When they returned home that evening, their apartment smelled of chemicals, and every surface gleamed with an unnatural cleanliness. Marcus had left detailed instructions. Keep windows open when possible for the next 3 days, wash all fabrics again, and maintain vigilance for any signs of new bites. That night, Ethan had fallen asleep quickly, exhausted by the stress and the antihistamines still in his system. Sarah had watched him breathe, counting each rise and fall of his chest like a prayer, until she too surrendered to sleep. The morning brought cautious optimism, no new bites, no itching, just the lingering chemical smell and the conspicuous absence of Mr. Buttons. "Can we visit him today?" Ethan had asked over breakfast, pushing his cereal around in the milk. Dr. Chang said we could visit him whenever we wanted. Sarah had promised they would go to the museum after school, a decision she would soon regret. For when they arrived at Dr. Chang's office that afternoon, they found not reassurance but devastating news. "I'm afraid the treatment was more challenging than anticipated," Dr. Chang told them, her expression grave. The infestation was deep within the bear's stuffing, with multiple egg clusters that had to be eliminated completely. She led them to a workbench where Mr. Buttons lay, nearly unrecognizable. The heat treatment had caused his plush body to collapse inward, his once soft fur now stiff and discolored. The missing button eye that had given him his name was joined by a new emptiness where his left ear had been, the fabric too damaged to salvage. Ethan's face crumpled at the sight, his small body shaking with silent sobs. Sarah gathered him into her arms, feeling his tears soak through her shirt as Dr. Chang continued her explanation, words Sarah barely registered through her own grief for her son's loss. "We've eliminated the insects, but the damage to the bear's structural integrity was unavoidable," the scientist was saying. "We could recreate his appearance with new stuffing and fabric, but it wouldn't be the same bear. Not really." Sarah had thanked her mechanically, then carried Ethan, still crying, back to the car. The drive home passed in a fog of mutual heartbreak, interrupted only by Ethan's occasional hiccuping sobs. By the time they reached their apartment building, a new problem awaited them. Mrs. Cooper, the property manager, stood outside their door with a manila envelope in hand, her expression pinched with distaste. "Miss Miller," she said, thrusting the envelope forward, "this is an official notice from the building management. We've received complaints about a potential infestation in your unit and reports of unauthorized individuals in hazmat equipment entering the premises." Sarah took the envelope with numb fingers. "We had a parasite problem. It's being treated professionally. Be that as it may, your lease clearly states that any infestation must be reported to management immediately. You failed to do so." Mrs. Cooper's eyes slid to Ethan, who stood shell-shocked beside his mother, face still streaked with tears. Something in her expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. "The notice gives you 30 days to vacate the premises." "You're evicting us?" "But we've solved the problem. The university team confirmed it's under control. The decision is final, Miss Miller. Other tenants have expressed concerns about their own units becoming infested." Mrs. Cooper hesitated. "For what it's worth, I fought against this decision, but the building owner was adamant." After she left, Sarah opened the envelope with shaking hands, skimming the legal language that confirmed their eviction. Another move, more expenses they couldn't afford, the loss of the first stable home they'd had since Michael died. It was too much, coming on the heels of everything else. Ethan had retreated to the bathroom, locking the door despite Sarah's gentle knocking. The sound of his muffled crying broke something in her, the last thread of composure she'd been desperately clinging to. Sliding down the wall outside the bathroom door, she buried her face in her hands and wept. That night marked the beginning of Ethan's rapid decline. He refused dinner, then breakfast the next morning. Dark smudges formed beneath his eyes as sleep eluded him, his body jerking awake whenever it began to drift off, hands reaching instinctively for a comfort that was no longer there. "I can't sleep without Mr. Buttons," he whispered when Sarah tried to coax him back to bed at 3 in the morning. "The monsters come back when he's not here." Sarah held him through the night, singing the lullabies Michael used to sing, trying to replace one source of comfort with another. But the damage had been done. The one constant in Ethan's life since his father's death, the tactile, physical reminder of Michael's love, was gone, destroyed by the very thing that had made it special, its origin in that far-off jungle, where Michael had spent his final days of health. The practical problems mounted alongside the emotional ones. Sarah received an official warning at work about her tardiness and absences. Their health insurance denied coverage for Ethan's clinic visits, citing a technicality about pre-existing conditions and failure to disclose known issues when they'd enrolled in the plan 6 months earlier. By the third day, Ethan's school called. He had fallen asleep at his desk again, but this time he couldn't be roused for nearly 10 minutes. When he finally woke, he was disoriented and complained of dizziness. The school nurse recommended immediate medical attention. Sarah left work mid-shift, ignoring Ellen's concerned questions, and rushed to the school. Ethan sat pale and withdrawn in the nurse's office, his backpack clutched to his chest like a poor substitute for his lost bear. The nurse took Sarah aside, speaking in hushed tones. "His temperature is slightly elevated, and his blood pressure is lower than I'd like. Has he been eating regularly?" Sarah admitted he hadn't, shame coloring her cheeks. "He's been through a lot recently. We both have." The nurse's eyes were kind but concerned. "I think he needs to see a doctor, Miss Miller. This level of fatigue and these vital signs aren't normal for a child his age." As Sarah helped Ethan to her car, she noticed Mrs. Wilson watching them from her apartment window, the elderly woman's face unreadable behind the glass. Another set of judgmental eyes tracking their family's disintegration. Sarah lifted her chin defiantly and kept walking, one arm supporting her increasingly wobbly son. "I'm sorry, Mommy," Ethan mumbled as she buckled him into his booster seat. "I'm trying to be brave like Dad would want." Sarah's throat constricted with emotion. "You are brave, sweetheart. So much braver than anyone should have to be at 7 years old." As she started the car, Sarah caught a glimpse of her reflection in the rearview mirror, hollow-eyed, pale, with strands of hair escaping her hasty ponytail. She hardly recognized herself anymore. In just 2 months, the promising fresh start of their new apartment had devolved into a nightmare with no apparent end. The only certainty was that tomorrow would bring them one day closer to homelessness, as the 30-day eviction clock ticked relentlessly forward. What Sarah couldn't know, as she drove her exhausted son toward yet another medical appointment they couldn't afford, was that the next 24 hours would transform their crisis in ways no one could have predicted, beginning with the moment Ethan's eyes rolled back in his head and his small body began to convulse in the pediatric waiting room. "I need help," Sarah screamed as Ethan's body went rigid in the waiting room chair, then began jerking uncontrollably. Her nurse's training abandoned her in the face of her son's distress, terror obliterating everything but the animal need to protect her child. "Someone help my son." The sterile pediatric waiting room erupted into chaos. A nurse vaulted over the reception counter. Another ran from a back office. Sarah found herself gently, but firmly moved aside as they lowered Ethan to the floor, turning him onto his side and cushioning his head. "How long has he been seizing?" one asked, her voice calm but urgent. "Just started," Sarah managed, her voice barely recognizable. "Time it," the nurse instructed her colleague, then turned to Sarah. "Has this ever happened before?" Sarah shook her head, watching helplessly as her son's small body convulsed. "No, never. He's been having trouble sleeping, not eating well. The mysterious bites." "What bites?" the nurse asked sharply, checking Ethan's pulse. Before Sarah could respond, a doctor rushed and young, with close-cropped hair and rimless glasses. She knelt beside Ethan, whose convulsions were already beginning to subside. BP's dropping, the nurse reported. Pulse 145 and thready. Let's get him to trauma 2, the doctor ordered. Mom, I'm Dr. Reynolds. We need to stabilize your son. Can you tell me what happened before the seizure? As they transferred Ethan to a gurney, Sarah stumbled alongside, recounting the 6-week nightmare in disjointed fragments, the mysterious bites, the failed treatments, the discovery of the parasites in Mr. Buttons, the sleepless nights since the bear was destroyed. Dr. Reynolds' eyes widened slightly at the mention of parasites. What kind? She asked as they wheeled Ethan through double doors into a treatment room bright with fluorescent lights. Try something, Sarah said, struggling to remember the precise term Dr. Chang had used. Kissing bugs, she called them. From Brazil. Triatoma infestans? The doctor asked, now slipping an oxygen mask over Ethan's face as his seizure subsided into unconsciousness. Sarah nodded, startled. Yes, that's it. Draw blood for CBC, comprehensive metabolic, and parasitology, Dr. Reynolds instructed a nurse. Start in 4 with normal saline, and let's get his temperature. 103.2, another nurse reported. Dr. Reynolds turned to Sarah. Your son may have developed Chagas disease. It's a parasitic infection transmitted by those insects you mentioned. When did he last receive a bite? 4 days ago, I think. Right before we had to. Sarah couldn't finish, the memory of Mr. Button's ruined form still too raw. The insect defecates after feeding, Dr. Reynolds explained, her tone professional but kind. If Ethan scratched the bites, the parasites could enter his bloodstream. Chagas can affect the heart and nervous system if left untreated. Sarah's knees buckled. A nurse guided her to a chair as the room seemed to tilt around her. Chagas disease. Not just bites, but a serious illness transmitted by those undetectable insects that had hidden in her son's most treasured possession. An illness that had been attacking Ethan's body for weeks while doctors dismissed his symptoms as mere bug bites or, worse, evidence of neglect. Will he be okay? She managed to ask, her voice small and distant to her own ears. We'll know more after the blood tests, but children generally respond well to treatment if we catch it early enough, Dr. Reynolds assured her. We need to admit him immediately. The seizure was likely caused by fever and electrolyte imbalance from dehydration, but we need to monitor his cardiac function closely. The next few hours passed in a blur of forms, questions, and medical procedures. Sarah signed insurance paperwork she knew would be denied, authorized treatments they couldn't afford, answered the same questions repeatedly for different specialists. Sometime after sunset, Ethan was transferred to a room in the pediatric ward, still unconscious but stable, and 4 dripped fluids and medication into his arm, and a cardiac monitor beeped steadily beside his bed. Dr. Reynolds returned with a tablet in hand. The preliminary blood tests confirmed Trypanosoma cruzi in his bloodstream. That's the parasite that causes Chagas disease. We're starting him on antiparasitic medication immediately, but I need to ask you some questions about how he was exposed. Sarah recounted the whole story again, Michael's photography assignment in Brazil, the teddy bear he brought back for Ethan, the recent move, Dr. Chang's discovery. Where is the bear now? Dr. Reynolds asked. At the Natural History Museum with Dr. Chang. She's an entomologist who's been helping us. The bear was destroyed in the treatment process. Sarah swallowed hard against the lump in her throat. It was the last thing my husband gave our son before he died. Dr. Reynolds' professional demeanor softened. I'm very sorry, Miss Miller. That's an incredible burden for both of you. She hesitated, then continued. I should tell you that Chagas disease can sometimes remain dormant for years. It's possible your husband was also exposed during his trip to Brazil. Sarah's breath caught. Michael had a high fever the night before his accident. The doctors thought it was flu, but could it have been? It's possible, Dr. Reynolds said gently. Acute Chagas can present with flu-like symptoms, including fever, fatigue, and body aches. If he was driving while experiencing those symptoms. They said he fell asleep at the wheel, Sarah whispered, the implications washing over her in a cold wave. There were no skid marks. He just drifted off the road. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. An older doctor with silver hair and a weathered face entered, followed by a hospital administrator in a crisp suit. Miss Miller, I'm Dr. Harrison, Chief of Pediatrics, the older man said. This is Miss Winters from our Financial Services office. May we speak with you privately? I'm not leaving my son, Sarah said firmly, her hand finding Ethan's. Dr. Harrison nodded. I understand. Miss Miller, your son's case is rather unusual for our region. Dr. Reynolds has consulted with me about the treatment protocol. The standard course for pediatric Chagas includes benznidazole, which can have significant side effects, especially in children. But it will cure him? Sarah asked. It should eliminate the parasites, yes, but the medication is expensive and not always covered by insurance. A full course costs approximately $12,000. Sarah felt the room spin. $12,000 might as well be $12 million, an impossible sum for a single mother who had already exhausted her meager savings on exterminators and treatments that never worked. Our records indicate you're currently uninsured, Miss Winters added, consulting her tablet. Your application for Medicaid is still pending, and your employer-provided plan has denied coverage citing pre-existing conditions. My son didn't have a pre-existing condition, Sarah said, anger flaring through her exhaustion. He had undiagnosed parasites that multiple doctors missed. Nevertheless, Miss Winters continued impassively. The hospital requires a deposit of $5,000 before we can begin the specialized treatment Dr. Harrison is recommending. 5,000, Sarah's voice broke. I don't have that kind of money. I'm being evicted from my apartment in less than a month. I've missed so much work, I might not even have a job anymore. There are social services, Miss Winters began, but Dr. Harrison cut her off with a raised hand. Janice, give us a moment, please, he said. When the administrator had left, he pulled a chair close to Sarah. Miss Miller, I apologize for the bureaucratic insensitivity. Your son will receive treatment regardless of your ability to pay upfront. We can discuss payment plans later. Sarah's eyes filled with tears of relief and gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. There's something else, Dr. Harrison said, his voice lowering. Dr. Reynolds mentioned your husband might have had undiagnosed Chagas disease at the time of his accident. If that's the case, there could be grounds for reopening his insurance claim. Most auto insurance policies exclude coverage if the driver was impaired, but a previously undiagnosed medical condition causing impairment is a different matter entirely. Hope flickered in Sarah's chest, quickly dampened by reality. That was 3 years ago. I wouldn't even know how to begin proving it now. I might be able to help with that, came a voice from the doorway. Sarah turned to find Dr. Chang standing there, looking somewhat out of place in her casual weekend clothes, a leather briefcase clutched in one hand. I came as soon as I got your message, she said, stepping into the room. How is Ethan? Stable but unconscious, Dr. Harrison answered, rising to greet her. Dr. Rebecca Chang, I presume? Dr. Reynolds mentioned you'd been consulting on this case. Not in a medical capacity, Dr. Chang clarified. My expertise is in entomology, specifically parasitic insects. I identified the Triatoma infestans infestation in Ethan's teddy bear. She turned to Sarah. I heard about Ethan's seizure from Mrs. Wilson. She called the museum looking for me. Mrs. Wilson? Sarah asked, baffled. Our neighbor who barely speaks to us. Dr. Chang's expression softened. There's a great deal about this situation that needs explaining, but first she reached into her briefcase and withdrew a small leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed at the edges, the binding worn. I found this inside Mr. Button's during the treatment process. It was hidden in a secret compartment in the bear's backing, sealed in plastic. I believe it belonged to Michael. Sarah took the journal with trembling hands, instantly recognizing her husband's distinctive handwriting on the first page. The sight of it, those familiar loops and angles she hadn't seen in 3 years, sent a shock through her system. I've only skimmed it, Dr. Chang continued, but it appears to be Michael's field journal from the Brazil expedition. He documents experiencing fever, fatigue, and unusual rashes approximately 2 weeks into the trip. There's also a letter addressed to you, sealed in an envelope at the back. Sarah stared at the journal, unable to process this unexpected connection to Michael. Why had he hidden this inside Mr. Button's? Why not give it to her directly? A low moan from the bed interrupted her thoughts. Ethan's eyelids fluttered, his small hand twitching in hers. Ethan, Sarah leaned forward, brushing damp hair from his forehead. Can you hear me, sweetheart? Mommy, his voice was weak, barely audible. Where's Mr. Bottomans? I need him. Fresh tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. I'm here, baby. Mommy's right here. I'll leave you with your son, Dr. Harrison said quietly. We'll continue this conversation later, and I'll have Dr. Reynolds check on him shortly. As the doctors left, Sarah clutched Michael's journal in one hand and Ethan's small fingers in the other, feeling as though she were spanning time itself, connected to her past with Michael and her present with their son, both links tenuous and threatened. I found something that belonged to Daddy, she told Ethan softly. It was hidden inside Mr. Button's all this time, like a special secret he kept for you. Ethan's eyelids drooped, the medication pulling him back toward sleep. Can you read it to me? He murmured. Later, sweetheart. You need to rest now. As Ethan drifted off, Sarah became aware of movement in the doorway. She looked up to find Mrs. Wilson standing there, her aged face lined with what looked remarkably like concern. Mrs. Wilson? Sarah asked, confused by the elderly neighbor's presence. I heard about the boy, Mrs. Wilson said, her voice raspier than Sarah remembered. Dr. Chang told me he's got Chagas. Yes, but how do you know Dr. Chang? Why would she call you about Ethan? Mrs. Wilson stepped into the room, her gaze fixed on Ethan's sleeping form. Because I asked her to. Because 30 years ago, I lost my son to the same disease after my husband brought him a souvenir from Costa Rica. She finally met Sarah's eyes. Because I recognized those bites the first time I saw them on Ethan's neck, and I was too much of a coward to say anything. As the cardiac monitor beeped steadily beside Ethan's bed, Sarah felt reality shift once again. The cold neighbor who had avoided them in the hallway was suddenly revealed as a woman intimately familiar with the nightmare they were living, who might hold knowledge critical to Ethan's recovery. And Michael's journal, concealed inside Mr. Button's for 3 years, might contain not only answers about his own fate, but keys to saving their son. Sarah looked down at the worn leather cover in her hands, then back to Mrs. Wilson's weathered face. "Please," she said, "tell me everything you know." The hospital room grew quiet as Mrs. Wilson settled into the visitor's chair, her weathered hands clasped tightly in her lap. Outside, the evening had deepened into night, and the fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the elderly woman's face, deepening the lines of grief etched there decades ago. "My Thomas was 9, she began, her voice steady despite the pain Sarah could see in her eyes. "My husband Robert was an anthropologist who studied indigenous cultures in Central America. One summer, he brought back a hand-carved wooden flute for Thomas. Beautiful thing, with feathers and beads. Our son treasured it." Sarah glanced at Ethan, still sleeping fitfully, his small chest rising and falling beneath the hospital blanket. The cardiac monitor beeped with reassuring regularity, but each sound only emphasized how precarious his condition remained. 3 weeks later, Thomas started having fevers, fatigue. The doctor said it was summer flu. Then came the swelling around his eye we later learned that's called Roma's sign, a telltale symptom of acute Chagas. By the time they diagnosed him correctly, the parasites had already invaded his heart tissue. Mrs. Wilson's voice faltered for the first time. "He died 2 days before Christmas. The parasites caused his heart to simply stop." Sarah felt a cold wave of terror wash over her. "But Ethan, they caught it early," they said. "Medicine has advanced considerably in 30 years, Mrs. Wilson assured her quickly. "The treatments now are much more effective. But they're still harsh, especially on small bodies." She hesitated. "I wanted to warn you when I first spotted those bites on Ethan's neck, but I couldn't bring myself to speak of it. Cowardice, plain and simple. When I heard about the seizure today, I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer." Sarah wanted to be angry at this woman who might have spared Ethan weeks of suffering, but found she didn't have the energy for rage. Instead, she asked, "How did you know Dr. Chang?" "I've funded research into tropical parasitic diseases for 25 years, Mrs. Wilson replied. "The Rebecca Chang Fellowship at the university's entomology department bears my family name. Dr. Chang was one of our first grant recipients." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "I've kept tabs on you and Ethan since you moved in. When I recognized those bites, I contacted Dr. Chang immediately, though I asked her not to reveal my involvement." Sarah struggled to reconcile this revelation with the cold neighbor who had hurried past them in the hallway. But why hide your connection? Why not just help us directly? Mrs. Wilson's eyes dropped to her hands. "Because I failed my son. Because watching your boy suffer stirred up memories I've spent 30 years trying to bury. Because I'm a coward." She looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "And because my husband never forgave himself for bringing home the object that ultimately killed our son. He took his own life 6 months after Thomas died." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The tragedy of this woman's history, losing both her child and husband to the same parasitic nightmare now threatening Ethan, was almost unbearable to contemplate. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, the words wholly inadequate. "You still have a chance to save your boy," Mrs. Wilson said firmly. "And I intend to help you do it. I've already spoken with Dr. Harrison about covering Ethan's treatment costs through my foundation." Before Sarah could process this extraordinary offer, Ethan's monitor began beeping rapidly. His small body suddenly went rigid in the bed, back-arching unnaturally as another seizure took hold. "Nurse," Sarah shouted, lunging for the call button as Mrs. Wilson rushed to the door. Within seconds, the room flooded with medical personnel. Dr. Reynolds pushed past, barking orders as she assessed Ethan's condition. His tachycardic pulse 190. BP's dropping. Push 5 milligrams diazepam for now. Sarah found herself pressed against the wall, watching helplessly as her son's body convulsed beneath the hands of strangers. Someone guided her and Mrs. Wilson into the hallway as more equipment was wheeled into the room. Through the doorway, she caught glimpses of Ethan's face, pale as the sheets, an oxygen mask being placed over his nose and mouth. "What's happening?" she asked anyone who would listen. "Is it the Chagas? His heart?" A nurse took her arm gently. "The doctor will update you as soon as she can. These seizures can be triggered by the parasite or by fever. They're doing everything possible." The minutes stretched endlessly. Sarah paced the corridor, Michael's journal clutched to her chest like a talisman. Mrs. Wilson sat rigidly in a waiting area chair, her face a mask of contained grief. When Dr. Reynolds finally emerged, her scrubs askew and expression grim, Sarah braced herself for the worst. "We've stabilized him for now," the doctor said without preamble. "But I'm concerned about cardiac involvement. The EKG is showing some arrhythmia, which suggests the parasites may have invaded the heart muscle." "What does that mean?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. "It means we need to start the antiparasitic treatment immediately, regardless of financial clearance." Dr. Reynolds' eyes were kind but direct. "There's also a cardiologist coming to assess him. Ethan may need additional medications to support his heart function while we fight the infection." "Do whatever you need to do," Sarah said, the weight of each word pressing her further into an abyss of helplessness. "Just save my son." Dr. Reynolds nodded briskly. "We're moving him to the pediatric ICU for closer monitoring. You can join him there once he's settled." As the doctor returned to the room, Mrs. Wilson approached Sarah. "I meant what I said about covering the costs. I'll speak with the hospital administration immediately." Sarah nodded numbly, beyond the capacity for proper gratitude. As Mrs. Wilson departed on her mission, Sarah found herself alone in the sterile hallway, surrounded by the mechanical hum of hospital equipment and distant voices. She slid down the wall to the floor, still clutching Michael's journal. With trembling fingers, she opened it to the first page, seeking some connection to her husband in this moment of unbearable solitude. His familiar handwriting swam before her tear-filled eyes. "June 5th arrived in Manaus today. The humidity is staggering, but the biodiversity is even more overwhelming. Our guide, Eduardo, promises we'll see species unknown to Western science once we reach the interior." Thinking of Sarah and Ethan constantly. "The satellite phone barely works here, and I miss their voices already." She turned pages at random, finding sketches of plants, notes on indigenous medicinal practices, and increasingly, mentions of his own health. June 17th woke with fever again. "Eduardo says it's probably just traveler's adjustment, but I've never felt this kind of bone-deep fatigue before. Noticed a strange rash on my arm this morning, near the site of that bug bite from last week." Sarah's heart pounded as she read, piecing together what Michael himself had been realizing, that he had contracted something serious during his expedition. The journal entries grew shorter, more labored, as his condition worsened. Then she found a page dated just 2 days before his return flight. "June 28th local healer confirmed what I feared. The symptoms match what they call the sleeping death here Chagas disease. She's given me traditional remedies, but says without proper medicine, the parasite will remain in my blood forever. May cause heart problems years from now. Cannot tell Sarah we've barely recovered financially from the housing market crash. Cannot risk losing insurance with a pre-existing condition, not with Ethan's future to secure. Have decided to document everything I've learned about local treatments for the university. May help others someday. Will hide these notes where Sarah won't find them until after. If things go badly. Mr. Buttons seems the perfect hiding place. Ethan will treasure him, and Sarah would never dismantle something so precious to our son. Tears splashed onto the page as Sarah realized the full, terrible truth. Michael had known he was infected. He had hidden his condition to protect their insurance coverage, to ensure Ethan would be provided for if the worst happened. And in a final cruel irony, the teddy bear he'd chosen as the repository for this secret had carried the very insects that had transmitted the same deadly parasites to their son. Clutching the journal to her chest, Sarah surrendered to overwhelming grief. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs as she mourned not only the husband she had lost, but the unbearable weight of his final secret. Somewhere in the hospital, Ethan's life hung in the balance, threatened by the same disease that had likely caused Michael's fatal accident, a disease he had unwittingly brought home to his beloved son. A soft hand touched her shoulder. She looked up to find Dr. Chang standing over her, face etched with concern. "They've taken Ethan to the ICU," the scientist said gently. "I can show you the way." Sarah allowed herself to be helped to her feet, clutching the journal like a lifeline. As they walked the maze of hospital corridors, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead, she felt as though she were moving through a nightmare from which there was no awakening. When they reached the pediatric ICU, Sarah froze in the doorway. Ethan lay motionless in a bed that seemed far too large for his small frame, wires and tubes connecting him to an array of beeping machines. His face was ashen beneath the oxygen mask, and for the first time, Sarah allowed herself to confront the terrible possibility that she might lose him, that the last gift from his father might claim him just as surely as it had claimed Michael. Sarah spent the night in a vinyl recliner beside Ethan's ICU bed, drifting in and out of restless sleep as nurses came and went, checking vital signs and adjusting medications. In her dreams, Michael appeared, standing at the foot of Ethan's bed, his face etched with the same worry and love that had characterized his final months of life. "I never meant for this to happen," Dream Michael whispered, his voice hollow with regret. "I was trying to protect you both." She jerked awake at dawn, momentarily disoriented by the mechanical symphony of the ICU and the harsh fluorescent lighting that never dimmed. Ethan remained unconscious, his face pale but peaceful beneath the oxygen mask. The antiparasitic treatment had begun late the previous night, a clear solution dripping steadily into his veins, waging microscopic warfare against the invaders in his bloodstream. Dr. Reynolds arrived shortly after 7, accompanied by a tall, distinguished man she introduced as Dr. Patel, the hospital's chief cardiologist. Their examination was thorough and silent, communicating in the shorthand of medical professionals while Sarah watched anxiously from the corner. "The arrhythmia has stabilized somewhat," Dr. Patel finally said, reviewing the readouts from Ethan's cardiac monitor. "His heart is showing remarkable resilience, but will continue close monitoring for at least 72 hours. The next 2 days will be critical as the antiparasitic medication reaches therapeutic levels." "And the seizures?" Sarah asked, her voice raspy from lack of sleep. "We've got him on anticonvulsants as a precaution," Dr. Reynolds explained. "The last EEGs showed decreased abnormal activity. That's a positive sign." After the doctors left, Sarah found herself alone with her son and the relentless beeping of machines. She opened Michael's journal again, turning to the sealed envelope tucked into the back cover. Her name was written across it in Michael's handwriting, the ink slightly faded with time. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. I pray you've found this journal by accident, years from now, when Ethan is grown and these words are nothing but a curious artifact of a long past worry. But if not, if you've found this because you needed to, then I owe you the complete truth. I am sick, Sarah. During the expedition, I was bitten by what the locals call the kissing bug. The village healer confirmed what I suspected. I have contracted Chagas disease. Without proper treatment, the parasites will remain in my bloodstream forever, potentially causing heart problems years from now, or sooner. I've made the decision not to seek treatment when I return home. Our insurance has a pre-existing condition clause that would devastate our coverage if this diagnosis appeared in my medical records. With the housing market crash, we've already lost so much of our savings. I cannot risk your security and Ethan's future. The local healer has given me traditional remedies that she claims will keep the acute symptoms at bay. I'm documenting everything I learn about these treatments in this journal. Perhaps someday this information might help others. I've hidden this journal inside Mr. Buttons, the teddy bear I'm bringing home for Ethan. I know our son will treasure it, and that you would never discard something so precious to him. If my condition worsens suddenly, if anything happens to me, I wanted a way for you to discover the truth when you are ready. Please know that every decision I've made has been out of love for you and Ethan. If I've made the wrong choice, I pray you'll forgive me someday. All my love, always. Michael. Sarah pressed the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Michael had sacrificed himself to protect their financial security, hiding his illness to preserve their insurance coverage. And now, through a terrible twist of fate, that same disease was threatening their son. A soft knock at the door interrupted her grief. She looked up to find Dr. Peterson, the clinic doctor, who had dismissed Ethan's condition and threatened to call Child Protective Services, standing awkwardly in the doorway. Miss Miller, he said hesitantly, may I come in? Sarah stiffened, instinctively moving closer to Ethan's bed. What do you want? Dr. Peterson entered slowly, his usual brusque demeanor replaced by something that looked remarkably like shame. I came to apologize. Dr. Reynolds called me about Ethan's diagnosis. I missed it completely. I should have considered parasitic infection, especially after you mentioned the recent move potentially activating dormant pests. You threatened to have my son taken away, Sarah said, her voice low but steady. You made me feel like I was crazy or neglectful when I was doing everything possible to help him. You're right, Dr. Peterson admitted, surprising her. And I was wrong. Inexcusably wrong. He hesitated, then added, I lost a patient to Chagas disease 15 years ago. A little girl, just a year older than Ethan. By the time her parents brought her to me, it was too late. The cardiac damage was irreversible. Sarah remained silent, watching him struggle. After that case, I became hypervigilant about household infestations, perhaps to the point of overcorrection. He gestured helplessly. I see now that I was addressing my own guilt by placing blame on you. It was unprofessional and harmful. Before Sarah could respond, another figure appeared in the doorway, Dr. Chang, carrying a thick folder of papers and looking uncharacteristically disheveled, as though she'd been up all night. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, taking in the scene with a quick glance, but this couldn't wait. She approached Sarah, laying the folder on the small bedside table. I spent the night reviewing Michael's journal and consulting with colleagues in tropical medicine. There's something here that might help Ethan. Dr. Peterson moved toward the door. I should go. No, Sarah said, surprising herself. Stay. Please, whatever her feelings toward the clinic doctor, his expertise might be valuable now. Dr. Chang opened the folder, revealing photocopied pages from Michael's journal alongside modern medical literature. Michael documented several indigenous remedies for Chagas disease, including a particular herb mixture the local healer gave him. "Look at this." She pointed to a detailed drawing of a plant with small star-shaped flowers. "That's Bryophyllum pinnatum," Dr. Peterson said, leaning closer. "It's being studied for anti-inflammatory and immunomodulatory properties." "Exactly," Dr. Chang confirmed. And here, Michael notes that the local healer combined it with two other plants to create what she called the sleeping death cure. "I've had these compounds analyzed by a colleague in pharmacology. They contain natural quinones that show activity against Trypanosoma cruzi in preliminary lab studies." Sarah looked between them, hardly daring to hope. "Are you saying Michael discovered a treatment that could help Ethan?" "Not a replacement for the conventional antiparasitic medication," Dr. Chang clarified, "but potentially a complementary therapy that might reduce the cardiac inflammation Chagas often triggers. The antiparasitic drugs kill the parasites, but much of the damage comes from the body's inflammatory response." Dr. Peterson was now fully engaged, his earlier discomfort forgotten as he examined Michael's detailed notes. "These formulations are remarkably specific. Your husband was extremely thorough in his documentation." "He was always meticulous in his work," Sarah said softly, glancing at Ethan's still form. "He would have wanted this information to help others, especially his son." A new presence filled the doorway. Dr. Harrison, the chief of pediatrics, accompanied by Mrs. Wilson and a man Sarah didn't recognize in an expensive suit. "Miss Miller," Dr. Harrison began, "this is Mr. Alvarez from hospital administration. He has some information regarding Ethan's treatment plan." Mr. Alvarez stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral. "Miss Miller, we've received notification that all costs associated with your son's care will be covered by the Wilson Foundation for Tropical Disease Research. Additionally, Mrs. Wilson has proposed funding a specialized treatment protocol based on research documentation apparently provided by your late husband." Sarah looked to Mrs. Wilson in astonishment. The elderly woman nodded slightly, her usual stern expression softened by what might have been the ghost of a smile. "There's more," Dr. Harrison continued. "Dr. Chang and Dr. Peterson have proposed an integrative treatment approach combining the standard antiparasitic protocol with a modified version of the herbal compound documented in your husband's journal. It would be considered experimental, requiring your consent and oversight from our ethics committee. It could reduce the cardiac inflammation more effectively than our standard treatments alone," Dr. Peterson added, a new urgency in his voice. Based on Michael's notes, the indigenous healer specifically used this treatment for children, with compounds carefully balanced to minimize side effects on developing hearts. Sarah's mind reeled as she processed this sudden reversal of fortune. Just hours ago, she had been facing financial ruin and the terrifying possibility of losing Ethan. Now, the very doctor who had threatened her was advocating for her son's treatment. A wealthy neighbor she'd barely spoken to was covering their medical costs, and Michael, her beloved, long dead Michael, might have provided the key to saving their son's life through his meticulous documentation. "Why?" she asked Mrs. Wilson directly. "Why would you do all this for us?" The elderly woman's composed facade cracked slightly. "Because 30 years ago, I would have given anything for someone to offer my Thomas this chance. And because your husband's research may help countless others facing this disease," she stepped closer to Ethan's bed, gazing down at his pale face. "Children shouldn't pay the price for the souvenirs adults bring home." "There's something else you should know," Dr. Chang said quietly. "Something I should have told you from the beginning." She took a deep breath. "I knew Michael." We worked together briefly during the expedition to Brazil. Sarah stared at her. You knew my husband? Why didn't you say anything? Because our connection was complicated, Dr. Chang replied, her professional composure slipping for the first time. I was the junior entomologist on the expedition, studying the very insects that transmitted Chagas disease. I was the one who first suspected Michael's illness and who introduced him to the village healer. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of Ethan's monitors, the truth hanging in the air between them that Dr. Chang had recognized Mr. Buttons not just as a potential harbor for parasites, but as a teddy bear she had watched Michael purchase in a Brazilian village market, knowing what he planned to hide inside it. I promised Michael I would look out for you both if anything happened to him, Dr. Chang continued softly. I've kept tabs on you from a distance all these years. When Mrs. Wilson contacted me about suspicious insect bites on a child in her building, I never imagined it would be Ethan. Her eyes met Sarah's. I failed Michael, and I failed you. But I won't fail Ethan. Not now. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the doorway of Ethan's new bedroom, watching as he carefully arranged his books on a small shelf beside the window. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hardwood floors, highlighting dust motes dancing in the air. Their new apartment was smaller than the previous one, just a one-bedroom with a converted dining nook that now served as Ethan's space, but it was clean, affordable, and most importantly, theirs. The journey to this moment had been arduous. After 2 weeks in the hospital, including 5 tense days in the pediatric ICU, Ethan had been discharged with a treatment regimen that would continue for another 6 weeks. His recovery had been steady but gradual, his small body rebuilding its strength day by day. Through it all, Michael's journal had remained his constant companion, replacing Mr. Buttons as the object he reached for when anxiety struck or sleep proved elusive. The integrated treatment approach, combining conventional antiparasitic medication with the modified herbal compounds documented in Michael's journal, had exceeded everyone's expectations. Dr. Peterson, in a complete reversal of his earlier dismissiveness, had become Ethan's most devoted advocate, personally overseeing the formulation of the complementary therapy and monitoring his cardiac function daily. This could change how we treat pediatric Chagas cases, he had told Sarah on the day Ethan was moved out of the ICU. Michael's documentation of these indigenous remedies, the precise measurements, the preparation methods, it's extraordinary. We've already seen a significant reduction in inflammatory markers that we don't typically achieve with conventional treatment alone. Finding a new place to live had presented its own challenges. Their eviction from Cedar Heights had left a mark on Sarah's rental history, and few landlords were willing to take a chance on a tenant with recent credit issues, regardless of the circumstances. It was Mrs. Wilson who ultimately provided the solution. My sister owns a duplex on Maple Street, she had told Sarah, stopping her outside the hospital one evening. The downstairs unit just opened up. It needs some work, but she's willing to waive the security deposit if you can help with some repairs. The offer had felt like divine intervention. The apartment was within walking distance of both Ethan's school and the hospital, meaning Sarah could pick up extra shifts without worrying about commuting time. The trade-off of minor repairs, mostly painting, and some light carpentry for reduced rent had made the place financially feasible, even with their depleted savings. More surprising changes had followed. The hospital's ethics committee, impressed by the results of Ethan's treatment, had approved a small pilot study of the integrated therapy for other Chagas patients. Sarah had been offered a position as a patient liaison for the program, leveraging her nursing background and personal experience to support other families navigating the challenging diagnosis. Mom, Ethan's voice drew Sarah back to the present. Where should I put Dad's journal? Sarah crossed the room and knelt beside him, surveying the nearly arranged bookshelf. I think it deserves a special place, don't you? Maybe right here in the center, where you can always find it. Ethan nodded solemnly, placing the leather-bound book in the spot she had indicated. His fingers lingered on its worn cover for a moment before he turned to face her. Dr. Chang is coming today, right? That's right. She's bringing something special for you. Sarah smoothed a hand over his hair, noticing how it had regained its luster in recent weeks. The dark circles under his eyes had faded, and his cheeks had filled out again as his appetite returned. He looked like himself again, like Michael's son, with the same spark of curiosity lighting his eyes. The doorbell rang, and Ethan raced to answer it, his socked feet sliding on the hardwood. Sarah followed at a more measured pace, smiling at his excitement. When she reached the small entryway, she found Ethan already deep in conversation with Dr. Chang and a young girl about his age who could only be the scientist's daughter, Lucy. Miss Miller, Dr. Chang greeted her warmly. I hope we're not interrupting your settling in. Not at all, Sarah assured her, gesturing for them to enter. We're almost finished unpacking. Ethan was just arranging his books. Lucy, a solemn-faced child with her mother's intelligent eyes, held a wrapped package tied with blue ribbon. This is for you, she told Ethan, extending the gift. Mom said you lost your special bear. Ethan accepted the package with visible trepidation, looking to Sarah for reassurance. At her encouraging nod, he carefully untied the ribbon and removed the wrapping paper. Inside was a teddy bear, not an exact replica of Mr. Button's, but a handcrafted bear with soft brown fur and bright button eyes. He's from the same village as your original bear, Dr. Chang explained. But this one has been thoroughly treated and certified parasite-free. The artisans there were devastated to learn what happened and wanted to make amends. Ethan studied the bear cautiously, his fingers exploring its stitching and the texture of its fur. Does he have a name? He asked Lucy. You get to name him, she replied matter-of-factly. But I think he looks like a professor, because he's smart enough not to have bugs. This unexpected assessment startled a laugh from Ethan, the first genuine laugh Sarah had heard from him in months. Professor, he repeated, testing the name. I like that. As the children moved to Ethan's room to introduce Professor to his new home, Sarah led Dr. Chang to the small kitchen. She put on a kettle for tea, the familiar domestic ritual calming the surge of emotion brought on by watching Ethan accept this new chapter. Thank you, she said simply, for everything, the treatment, the help with the hospital bills, this, she gestured to encompass the apartment and all it represented, their fresh start. Dr. Chang waved away her gratitude. I did very little. The real hero in all this was Michael. His research, his notes, they made the difference for Ethan. And for others too, from what I hear. Sarah had received word that the hospital's research team, in collaboration with Dr. Chang, had begun clinical trials of a modified version of the botanical treatment that had helped Ethan. It's strange to think that Michael's last adventure might end up saving lives years later. Not strange, Dr. Chang corrected gently. Fitting. Michael was always seeking connections between people and nature, between traditional knowledge and modern science. He would have been pleased to see his work continuing. The kettle whistled, and Sarah poured hot water over tea bags, her movements automatic as her mind drifted to memories of Michael, not the painful memories of loss that had dominated for so long, but earlier ones. Michael showing Ethan how to hold a camera. Michael's laughter when Sarah burned their anniversary dinner. Michael pressing a kiss to her temple as he left for his final trip, promising to bring back something amazing for both of them. He had kept that promise, though not in any way he could have imagined. From Ethan's room came the sound of childish laughter, both his and Lucy's, accompanied by the rhythmic thumping of what sounded like a pillow fight. Sarah and Dr. Chang exchanged knowing smiles. "I'm glad he's found a friend," Sarah said. The kids at his old school were less than kind after word got out about the parasites. "Lucy knows something about being different," Dr. Chang replied. "She had her own battle with illness 2 years ago. It gives her compassion beyond her years." Outside the kitchen window, the first stars of evening were appearing in the darkening sky. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, in a way their previous apartment never had been. In this moment of stillness, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of rightness, of being exactly where they were meant to be. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would still be follow-up appointments for Ethan, tight finances to navigate, and the ongoing challenge of rebuilding their lives. But for the first time since Michael's death, Sarah felt they were moving forward rather than merely surviving. And in that forward motion, there was hope as bright and steady as the stars now filling the night sky, watching over them like distant, familiar eyes. In the living room, on the small mantel above the electric fireplace, Sarah had placed a framed photo of Michael holding 4-year-old Ethan on his shoulders, both of them laughing. Beside it sat Michael's journal, open to a page where he'd written, "Some journeys continue long after the traveler believes they've ended." Sarah touched the page gently, tracing the words with her fingertip. "You're still with us," she whispered to the empty room, "in ways we never could have imagined." From Ethan's bedroom came his voice, bright with excitement as he showed Lucy his collection of dinosaur books. The sound of her son's happiness, a sound she had feared she might never hear again, was the sweetest music Sarah could imagine. The bites had healed. The parasites were gone. The wounds in their hearts were mending, slowly but surely. And Michael's final gift had turned out to be not just a teddy bear, but the knowledge that would save their son and perhaps countless other children in the years to come. Sarah lifted her tea to her lips and smiled. Some gifts, it seemed, kept on giving, long after the giver was gone. As we age, we understand that life's most profound lessons often come wrapped in our deepest struggles. Sarah and Ethan's journey reminds us that even in our darkest moments, when we feel most alone and abandoned by the systems meant to protect us, unexpected connections can become our salvation. For those of us who've lost beloved spouses, the story echoes our own experiences of finding their presence lingering in unexpected places, sometimes years later, still guiding and protecting our families in ways we never imagined. Like Sarah, many of us have faced dismissal from authorities, struggled with mounting medical bills, or worried about providing stability for our children or grandchildren. We've known the heartbreak of watching a child suffer and feeling powerless to help. But this story speaks to the resilience we've cultivated through decades of living, the wisdom to recognize when to fight, when to accept help, and how to rebuild from devastation. Most importantly, it reminds us that our life's work, like Michael's research, may bear fruit long after we're gone, touching lives in ways we could never predict, proving that love transcends even death itself. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.